Hi, thanks so much for joining me. In a moment, I'm going to be having a chat with the world famous Adele Diamond, who is a professor of neuroscience at the University of British Columbia. She's also given a TED Talk, which you can find online if you Google it. She has pioneered research into executive function development, especially in the early years and especially in how we can do this outside of the academic field. So we're going to be having a chat about what we can do at this time when children aren't in school to help develop their executive functions to help them flourish. So sit back, relax and enjoy this interview, which takes just over 10 minutes. Oh, thank you so much, Adele, for joining us this evening and for giving up your free time to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
No problem. My pleasure.
Oh, fantastic. And so I wanted to go ahead and start by asking you about executive functions. Can you tell us what they are and why they're important?
Well, executive functions is really a family of a few things that all depend on an area of the brain called prefrontal cortex and the other areas of the brain it's connected with. So one of the core executive functions is inhibitory control. And that involves self-control and selective attention. So, for example, it's resisting temptations, thinking before you speak or act, not acting rashly, being able to resist distraction and stay on task. So that's inhibitory control. Working memory is holding information in mind and working with it. So, for example, the aha moments when you grasp how one thing relates to another, you were using working memory. Working memory is critical for relating what's happening now to what's happened before or to imagine the future. It's critical for doing mental problem solving. And the third core executive function is cognitive flexibility, being able to think outside the box, being able to see something from different perspectives, being able to find your way around problems. And from those three core executive functions, higher level executive functions like reasoning, planning, and problem solving are built. And it's hard to think of any facet of life where these wouldn't be important, right? You if you don't want to make a social faux pas, if you want to obey the norms of society, you need inhibitory control. If you want to creatively problem solve, you need all three. So it's, whether you're talking about marital harmony or you're talking about success on the job, you need all three.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, they're so relevant, aren't they? And I'm always amazed by how few people actually know the term executive functions and what it means. But when you do understand it, it's a bit of an aha moment to be like, oh, okay, this is something that is in my brain. This is something as part of my cognition. It's not part of my character. And I think that's the big aha moment for most of people is they think it's something to do with their personality, but actually it's to do with the way that their brain's wired.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's not about character.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
In fact, I think parents can sometimes misunderstand a problem with inhibitory control as being a problem with character. So you think a child is intentionally misbehaving, when in fact, the child is really trying his or her best to do what's right, but doesn't yet have the inhibitory control to do that. So if you can understand that, then you can have a little more sympathy or patience with young children.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just having that knowledge, and then also a shared language to talk about what's going on, right? Instead of saying you're a naughty child, you say, you're struggling with your inhibitory control today. Is something going on? Is there something you want to talk about?
Yes.
It changes the whole conversation.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Great point.
Wonderful. So we're in challenging times at the moment, and parents are being told to work from home, to care for their children, to ensure that they complete their schoolwork, not to mention cleaning the home and doing all the catering. Need I go on? Really, the list is ridiculous. So, do you think this is a realistic explanation? I'm leading you now. And what are the consequences of this?
Well, I don't think it's any more realistic than to expect a single parent to be able to parent and clean house and have a job. I think even in the best of times, many parents are asked to do almost the superhuman. I think we need to maintain a sense of humor, and we need to try not to worry so much. A lot of what we worry about is what we're worried might happen in the future. But worrying about the future isn't going to help anything. It just makes you miserable in the present. So if you could just focus on the present, do you have food to eat? Do you have a roof over your head? Then, count your blessings and enjoy the time now instead of worrying about, well, maybe I can't pay next month's bills. What am I going to do about employment? Just worrying about it doesn't help anything. And so it's better to try to just focus on enjoying as much as you can now with your children and your family.
Oh, brilliant. Really, really wise words. Absolutely. So my next question is about thinking about how our brains are working at the moment. So we know that executive functions are influenced by our environment, by stress and loneliness and nutrition and sleep and exercise. They all play their part. If you were to take an MRI scanner and look inside the brains of what's going on of parents and students right now, how do you think their prefrontal cortex would be working?
Well, nobody's prefrontal cortex is probably working at its best right now because everybody's stressed. And stress affects prefrontal cortex first and most. So one of the things it does is that it disrupts the communication between prefrontal cortex and other regions of the brain. They can't talk to each other so well. And one of the examples of that is the amygdala is the part of the brain that's like a fire alarm. It starts screaming when there's danger in the environment, when there's reason to be afraid, when there's a threat. Now, often the amygdala will get all aroused, and then prefrontal will look around and say, really, there's no real danger in the environment. You can calm down, amygdala, and it can get the amygdala to stop firing so much. But when the communication is broken down, you see that prefrontal cortex is still trying to tell the amygdala it can calm down, but the amygdala is not hearing the message. So you stay in that hyperactivated state because the stress is not permitting prefrontal cortex to calm down the amygdala. That's just one example. So all of our executive functions suffer when we're stressed. We can't think as clearly. We can't exercise as good self-control. People are probably experiencing that they were about to do something, they forget what they were about to do, or they know they shouldn't shout or get upset, but they get upset because they're stressed.
Absolutely. So stress is going to be having a really negative impact on our executive functions. And so by expecting our executive functions to do more right now, by juggling everything, is kind of almost counterintuitive, right? Because it's going to be harder for us to do it.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So we love your work at Connections in Mind. I think it's fantastic. You talk a lot about nourishing the human spirit to help develop strong executive functions. Can you give us some practical examples of how parents can do this at this challenging time?
So where that comes from is what you were saying before, that if you're sad, if you're lonely, if you're stressed, if you're not physically fit, all of those take a toll on executive functions. So parents can try their best to reduce the children's anxiety and stress. Um, they can they can do things at home that give joy. You know, whether it's cooking together or it's building something together or just being together. Um, uh, the best way to take your mind off something else is to put your mind on something else. You know, it, it doesn't work so well to say don't think about the bear.
Yeah.
But if I give you something to do instead of thinking about the bear, then you won't think about it so much. So it doesn't help so much to say don't worry, but it can help to have other things to do to keep you busy in the present moment so that you're don't spend so much time worrying about the future. And young children love to help with adult chores. So if parents would just let them help out more at home, so they won't do it as well as us, but they can try to sweep the floor. They can try to set the table. They can try to cut vegetables. They can try to strain vegetables to rinse them. They can do all sorts of things to help. And they get so much joy out of this, and it actually helps their executive functions because it takes a lot of concentration for a young child to do these kinds of things. So you're helping build their executive functions at the same time that you're giving them something to do. It also probably will build their self-confidence because I'm helping just like a big adult would help.
Brilliant. So lovely. So it's about building connection with in your bubble, in your unit as a family, and then giving them things to do that they can achieve and feel that they've achieved something that's, a reasonable expectation of them, to help them to develop that independence and those executive functions.
Yep.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you for that. So my final question is a bit of a whimsical one, but people are talking about this experience that we're going through right now as being a turning point, a catalyst for change in our societies. If I was to grant you one wish today about what that change would be, what would you change and why?
That was your hardest question. I'm not sure what I'd say. Um, But I think there's several lessons that we get from this. One is that we're all connected, right? It started in China, but it affects everybody all over the world. Um, and I think that's an important lesson. Also, another lesson is how important it is to get ahead of the curve, to do things before things get too bad. And I think that has implications for a lot of things like climate change. Instead of waiting until it's too late, we need to try to get ahead of the curve if it's not too late and do something now. And I think it also emphasizes the importance of compassion and having concern for one another. Um, uh, because if one person's suffering now, somebody else might be suffering later. It might even be you. So let's have compassion for one another and to realize now during such a stressed time that people's executive functions are not going to be functioning so well. So they might fly off the handle. They might say things they regret. They might do things they regret. But to try to remember that that's coming from stress instead of from a malicious intent, then you can maybe react a little differently and have a little more patience with one another.
Wonderful. That sounds so great. So if we can use this to move forward positively, that's great. And we're hoping this time is a time of reflection for people where they can start learning a bit more about how their brains work, and think about doing things differently in the future in terms of boosting executive functions, being aware of them, talking about them, and just generally being more empathetic to each other when things aren't going as planned, as you said, and just really being there to support each other and being with people. That's
Yep.
wonderful. Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure to interview you. I really appreciate it.